Good morning, everybody. My name's Joe Broon. I'm the publisher of Housing Digital. Welcome to the Housing Digital Micro Conference on customer experience, tech with a human heart. We now move on to our third and final keynote, and I'm delighted to say that we've got Sebastian Weise, who is director at a company called Place Changes, who's got quite an interesting presentation to share. Sebastian, I shall hand over to yourself. You are free to share your screen.
So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I'll discuss the critical role as customer focus in planning projects. I'm eager to share some of the insights from my 15 years of experience in property and planning technologies, and we increasingly work with housing associations as part of the key aspects of what we do. So briefly about me, I'm a founder at Place Changes. It's a technology startup based in Newcastle with focus on design and planning of new housing or estate changes. So giving residents opportunities to influence their place in meaningful ways. So in 2020, amidst the pandemic, my colleague Alex Moon, who is my technical co-founder, we got the opportunity to go full time. And this was made possible by initially support from Innovate UK, the government's innovation agency, which helped us to deliver on our vision to enhance planning design projects with a strong focus on resident needs through health awareness of health issues locally and local needs, and then also involvement in those projects through digital means. I'm very excited actually about the housing sector. It's a sector which has a huge role to play in changing places for the better. We work with organizations like Carbon Homes and Believe Housing, and are very fortunate to have those organizations to work with. I mean, I'm sure there's many other organizations, particularly housing associations all over the country, that come in, with their vision and their mission for improving their places. We're based in the Northeast, so these are the sort of key organizations we work with. I'm very excited about housing. It's got this ability to make places better, and particularly housing associations have a key role as placemakers, as they invested in a place and stay there invested for a longer time. So many housing associations face challenges, of course, around customer focus, which we've already heard today, in sort of like new build or estate level changes. It's the same. So there's often challenges around involving large audiences. There can be existing customers, often they're actually also not customers, so from members of the general public. It's around making what's being planned or what's being discussed about easy to understand, so less technical. There's often this issue of technicalities and complexities that are difficult to communicate. It's about understanding residents' and customers' concerns before or at the earliest point possible, so that we can unlock positive outcomes, good local impact, and ultimately something what people these days refer as social value. I want to briefly think about what bills actually support, as many of us will appreciate that this is not necessarily always a given. So we've faced a lot of critique oftentimes in the projects that we do. And so this is where probably most of us will agree that engagement is absolutely crucial with customers at the earliest point, ideally, to give greater chances to enable that for customer focus. And it's the same also in planning. There's very many good guidances, like one of them is the Westminster Early Engagement Guide, just recapping on why that's really good to engage early. So around building that support, building that rapport, understanding constraints with people, and enabling outcomes that are essentially ultimately valued and have greater potential for impact, and therefore then also likelihood for more support. And then if we look at some interesting reports, there's this one here from 2015 from YouGov and Shelter, which I find really interesting, gives part of the inspiration for us. So if you're looking at what actually builds support for housing or new homes, it's often around those sorts of like, if you summarize those sort of different aspects here, around the material things. So for example, 41% would support more of their housing, if the neighborhood benefits, or 30% would support more if there's an emphasis on elements in the scheme design. 23% more if it's around if tenures and users are better considered, and 12%, that's the smallest numbers actually around how the involvement in the project happened. So actually what we want is, I think, in summarizing, outcomes that are meaningful and that make a change. And so this is why I think in terms of the mission that we do, is all around being more meaningful in our conversations with customers, looking at what are those wider benefits in the neighborhood, what are those things that can be changed on site that actually have meaningful change for residents. And so this is sort of like this, what I call as design focused, and being aware of what those talking points are that we can have a useful conversation about. And so this is where I think technology can help us. So technology is not a silver bullet, but it does enable certain things. So for example, it can help us with visualizing complex information more easily, more interactively, more person-focused as well. In the past, I saw questions like, do you agree with that more homes are needed? I mean, these kinds of questions typically don't really help very much. And so this is, I think, where more interactivity and more digital enabled communication can help us have those more personalized and more meaningful conversations, combined with the advancements in mapping technologies and various other things. You can actually simplify and make more complex technical information a lot more visual, and that's what we are partly very excited about. And so just really highlighting, so we've run most innovative new product at Housing Digital early in Feb, so which we're really excited about, very thankful for. So showing that the trajectory that we're on is going in the right direction. So on our sort of like platform or whatever, but just generally, I think what we try to do is combine really good insight on a place early on, because not everybody wants to have direct conversations with the customers quickly. So at least with data, you can look at what's the place potentially needing, identify some challenges, do some gap analysis, and do this quicker, more readily than before, where it was maybe more manual. And then have these useful conversations around visualizing proposals, visualizing projects, and making them meaningful, and then combining it with some of the projects we do now, depending on the size, related impact component as well for the planning element. So it's about being more user focused and customer focused ultimately, which this can enable. So I want to share a brief example with Carbon Homes, which I found really, it's a smaller project, but I think we have so many small projects in the country, and they can be very impactful on the whole. So this was for a project in a rural part of Durham for 43 bungalows for all the present living. I had a really good response. And so there was the capacity there for early gap analysis, which showed some of the things that make this a suitable place for this project. So looking at the place, we could see that there were key local service provided, for example, local GP with capacity. They were in the housing side of site. There was not enough. There weren't enough, or they weren't, compared to the region, not as many energy efficient properties. And they were actually also on the whole more larger properties in the area. And so like a little bit of a gap there in terms of the smaller ones. And then it was combined with the interactive consultation, and it got a really good response. So it enabled the local residents and customers to look at the design, join a guided tour, review the proposals on site, comment on housing offer, comment on things that they felt they were concerned about, like the entrance points, annotate the layout as they would do in a physical event. And we saw different audiences get involved, which I think in the sort of like focus on different customer segments are really key. So we've got the more immediate neighbors that are concerned around boundaries and issues that affect them directly. Those in the wider town that have some concern around local services capacities and how the town would change, and then residents from towns nearby which are generally supportive or interested in new housing, or where in this particular example. And we had some really good feedback. So residents, I think we had 47 residents, and they were looking at the at what's being part of the project. Made lots of good feedback on the housing, So in terms of shaping the tenure, some really good questions around what is on site and what's within the houses. And so some of those conversations were forwarded, and then we'll help shape that as it goes further into being built. Was lots of good feedback on the outside spaces as well. So both in terms of how the garden spaces would operate, and you know, some of these things can be tweaked even, I guess, without planning further changes in planning proposals or planning permission. And there was also some particular questions which are really easy to pick up for the team because they understood where they were and around clarification around boundary treatments and things like that, where it was easy to go back to these specific individuals with a response back of how those boundary treatments would be done. And then what also was coming through, which was really powerful, is the sort of optimizations and the integration and how this particular project would link to what's nearby. And a lot of people were mentioning the entrance points, the speed coming into town, and suggestions such as safe crossing at that point. And so these things are all really useful to feed in. And there was a general, I think what I was trying to say is that this kind of format, what we are interested in is a constructive conversation. And I think that's what we need to work with. And we need to be more comfortable and more, accepting that this can be very positive, essentially. So yeah, some of the points from the team was very much around this, this benefit of having both for the communities, easier ways of voicing their views, and for the team then therefore also being able to understand what actually people are saying a lot better because they can locate it, or maybe it's around specific things, or they sort of can place it and understand why the concern arose. And there was just general support also in this particular instance from counselors as well that thought people were involved. And I think just a nice example what the benefits can be. And then, yeah, just being more design focused can make projects for local residents more meaningful. And so we had actually more support than opposition on this particular example. And just, yeah, basically shows how we can be potentially more open to resident feedback in what we do on our existing estates, on our new build estates, to shape essentially what's coming up as an offer or improvements to places in the future, and take a more customer-centric approach in our planning projects. And yeah, and so that's basically me. So happy to have general discussion around customer-focused approach and planning design. And
excellent. Thank you, Sebastian. Much appreciated for a great presentation there. Have we got any questions for Sebastian, please?
To what extent is this tool kind of like, helping housing associations or developers market a project, and how much is it actually helping communities, to, constructively push back and say, no, this is our area. We don't want you coming in and telling us how it's going to be. We want it this way. So is that what it's kind of like helping to do? Democratize the process, I suppose, is a metaphor.
Yeah, I think we were on the call earlier and we were saying, well, a lot of customer service centers these days are maybe more around pushing an agenda. And yeah. I think we need to be more open to actually feedback. And I think there's also in a sort of like consultation sense often a line between how much do we focus on marketing what our offer is and what we put out there, and how much do we have these conversations and allow feedback that's a little bit more around the residents being able to push back. And I think it's not an easy question to answer. I think there's also, of course, also every project is different and you need to look at where it's fitting in. So I think I would say with some of the other work we do with regeneration projects, you have more of that sort of capacity where, I mean, we are currently working on a project or supporting a project where there's an old historical building and that's being brought into use, and that's around what could be the potential users in that particular building. And so there's more opportunity and scope to influence the design at an early stage. So it is a little bit project dependent, but I would say even in the projects where we've got sort of more clear ideas based on business case or maybe viability, this is what we want to do. I think the more we can give ourselves the comfort in projects to go out earlier and have a little bit of an acceptance that we don't have all the answers, it ultimately just helps if we can incorporate more of the feedback into our designs. And that's not always an easy thing for organizations to do, because they may want to rather focus on the benefits from a marketing perspective, not necessarily from sort of like discussing those further, if it makes sense. So
yeah, I mean, the other aspect of what you're saying, it's almost like, you know, metaphorically speaking, at least, it's all kind of like you're brainstorming with the local community. So I'm guessing they're going to come up with ideas that they might, you know, the organization might not have thought of, and it's like, oh yeah. So I mean, I guess there's that aspect as well.
Yeah, exactly. If you have projects that are very open at the beginning, you can have more of a discursive format at the very beginning. So we've got a lot of projects also where it's around baseline analysis or baseline consultation. And so this is where it allows you to have an easier way to identify opportunities and challenges. And so that's particularly good on the state level, where I think housing associations, as they go, there's a lot more interest in a sort of a spatial layer of feedback. Not only just anymore on housing, but actually also what's happening near our houses, and, you know, on the maybe open space, you know, next to our estate, or on the transport provision next to our estate. So essentially that you kind of start building up more of a picture as to what are those places where we operate as housing associations, what are those concerns that we can influence. And not always can we influence everything directly in a housing association, but maybe we need to work with a partner. But I think building in more of that sort of broader awareness, moving away from necessarily just the complaints focus, and moving more to a proactive position. I think that's sort of like a wider opportunity, I think, as the sector becomes more open potentially to feedback, customer feedback.
Thank you, Mark. We got any further questions for Sebastian, please?
Quick one from me. Apologies if I missed this, Sebastian, but where in the planning process does this fit? Is it before planning permission is granted, or both, or after?
Yeah, so it is before planning application is granted. If it's a new build, so that's where you go for planning application. You might have the pre-application consultation process, which is an informal stage for the developer or the housing association to resource as they wish, and organize in the way they want. So I think organizations can make a mark on how they do this, and can do it better, essentially, to inform their offer in the future. And then for regeneration projects, or where they've got estate level changes, it really depends. So sometimes, I mean, ultimately things lead to potentially planning applications if housing is changed, but it might be also more generally around estate maintenance aspects, and having sort of like an earlier conversation, which then might lead to a certain element of planning applications going into the planning application system.
Thanks.
This was the Housing Digital Microconference on the customer experience. We heard our first presentation today was from Nick Bush, who's the independent customer committee member at Trent and Dove Housing, and also expert practitioner at Hive Mind Network. Nick explored 5 ways to be human when it comes to customer experience, which are connection, community, complaints, commitment, and culture. He said something that particularly struck home with me, and it's more about connection rather than just contact. We then heard from Emma Midgley. Emma is the Director of Integration and Transformation at Johnny Johnson Housing, talking about doing best what matters most, salient points, keeping it simple, don't underestimate the skills gap within your organisation, how important comms are in terms of making sure colleagues are engaged and feel engaged, building a business partner approach, and the effective use of data and enablers within the organisation. And then finally, we heard from Sebastian Weise, who's director at Place Changes, who are a prop tech startup company, who have a digital planning toolkit. We're talking about embedding a customer focus in planning projects, the benefits of early engagement, and being design focused in order to deliver meaningful change for customers, and a place-based approach, making consultation much more meaningful. So just to say thank you to our 3 keynotes today. Thank you for everyone who attended. Big thank you to everyone involved, and we hope to see you at our next micro conference coming up in a couple of months.